Good afternoon, Halloween every night, readers and now listeners. My name is Austin Smedley, and I am sitting here with the wonderful Sandra Niemi. How are you doing this evening, Sandra?
Very well, thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much for sitting down and speaking with me
Yeah.
about this recent book, this project that is going to be coming out real soon for a lot of us horror fans and
Uh-huh.
aficionados. Very excited to get hands on that myself. I just first off wanted to ask. So your aunt was Maila Nurmi, is that correct?
That's correct. My father and Mila were siblings, the only two in the family.
It's very fascinating. And she went on to become something of a horror icon that people like myself, who are of a younger generation, see these images and photos and films from decades past, which are still very iconic and very easy to recognize.
Yes, yes. Who would have thought that in 1954 is when Vampira came out that people would still be talking about her 67 years later, something like that? It's crazy.
Icons have a way of persisting, whether through
Yeah,
film, music, however you go about it.
that's true. If she only knew now that she truly was an icon.
And those are the sorts of things that listeners and readers today would love to know more about. So, my first question to you would be: what are your first memories of Mela, growing up with her and living
Oh,
around her?
gosh. Well, I didn't live around her. I lived in Astoria, Oregon, and she lived 1,000 miles south in Hollywood. And my grandmother lived in Hollywood, but every summer she would travel up to Astoria, Oregon to babysit me as a child and complain about Mila. She doesn't write to me, she doesn't call me, just motherly concerns. But the first time I remember seeing Mila, I was 5. We went down to Los Angeles to pick up my grandmother to take her back to Astoria, and I met Mila for the first time that I remember. And she was the most gorgeous woman I had ever seen. She was blonde haired and vivid blue eyes with eyeshadow from eyelashes to eyebrows, blue eyeshadow, bright red lips, a gold lame dress, and transparent heels that I interpreted as glass slippers. And so she was my own private Cinderella.
Cinderella, exactly.
Yes.
There are some people I've always been curious about that being relatively close to the Hollywood area, and I've gone out there for a number of events. There are certain people who just have this aura about them that they just look or they speak in a certain way where you can just listen to them and watch them move and live their lives, and you think this person has something special about them. They're going somewhere.
Ah, you felt that way about Mila, or I should have felt that way about Mila. I don't understand. What do you mean? Mila had an aura about her that said, someday I'm going to be successful.
Something
Um,
of that persuasion. I would ask you, did she have that sort of aura about her?
well, I was only 5, and I remember, well, my grandmother told Mila after we left that Sandy is quite taken with you because she followed you everywhere and couldn't get her eyes off of you. And, she was just so beautiful. And I guess from that point on, I thought she was a big movie star. I didn't know, I just thought she's in Hollywood and she's beautiful, so she must be a movie star. And then I didn't see her again until I was 9. And she had a boyfriend then named Chuck Beatles, and they acted silly. I mean, we went to a restaurant and Mila went in barefoot and he had to carry her in. And then she sat on his lap while they ate and they ignored us. And on the way out of the restaurant, he carried her piggyback style into the car. My grandmother was so ashamed and embarrassed. And then I didn't see Mila again until I was 10 at my grandmother's funeral in Hollywood. And Mila, we were there for 3 days. Mila never changed clothes. She wore a black shift, white beat up flat shoes, no makeup, and a man's navy blue cardigan over this black shift. And the day before the funeral, she finally asked my mother, "What are you wearing to the funeral?" And my mother thought, "Oh, thank God she's going to change her clothes." But she didn't. She wore the same exact thing, but she wore the sweater inside out. I guess that was to signify that her life had been turned inside out with the death of her mother. I don't know. It was very strange, though. Then I didn't see her for 32 years until 1989. And, and that was the first time we had seen each other as adults together.
That was a pretty extreme gap there over three
Yes,
decades. Like, did your relationship pick up after that? Did you become more
yes,
close when you saw her once again?
yes. It wasn't that I was obsessed with my Aunt Mila. I always wanted to find her. And this is pre computer days. So I wrote to magazines, I wrote to newspapers, I wrote to Johnny Carson one time because he mentioned Vampire on his show. I never got a response. And then in 1988, I happened to pick up a Star magazine, and there was a 2 or 3 page article of Vampira suing Elvira. And that's how I found my Aunt Mila and knew she was still alive. And then I made plans to go visit her in 1989. And we wrote lots of letters back and forth. And in 1991, I sent her for Christmas a bottle of wine and some canned fish. I think there was sturgeon and salmon and tuna and all kinds of fish. And I sent it to her, and I never heard back. And I thought, well, that's Mila. Once she wants to erase you from her life, she does, and you never hear from her again. But in writing this book, I found out why that happened. It was the Ed Wood movie, and she became popular again and in demand, and she was just blossoming. She didn't have time to write to me anymore. And so that was the reason why the relationship broke down.
And that was essentially the end of it. And it broke down
Hmm.
from that point forward until her
Yes,
passing. Wow.
yes, yes. And then when I found out from my local newspaper that she had passed away 3 days after the fact. And I knew I had to somehow get to Los Angeles because I was her only family that she had left, I thought. And I had to take care of her the best I could. And so I found my way to Hollywood and found her apartment through a very bizarre happenstance. And then I was allowed to go into her apartment, and I started finding all these scraps of paper with her writing. And I thought, oh, this is what I want. I want to know who this woman is. I want to know her. I want to know how she spent her life, something I had never known. And so every scrap of paper that I found, I saved, whether it was a sentence or two crumpled up in an old jacket pocket, which I found, or pages and pages and pages of handwritten articles. I saved them all, and I have them all, and that's how the book came to be.
So are these, this is really how you got to know the real her? Are these just
Sure.
written like articles about just random things, thoughts she had, essays, poems, stuff like that? Like what was in these pages?
Oh, well, a lot of it I put in the book. I put her exact words in italics, as so it would carry the story along what was happening in her life. I didn't put in pages and pages that she wrote, but I would put them in my own words. But everything in italics are Mila's own words because I thought her fans would want to hear from her directly how she was feeling, the emotions she was feeling, the people she was seeing, what was happening in her life. Her relationship with Chuck Beatles, which started in 1956, ended very briefly, and he returned in 1965. He was a big love of her life. Her relationship with Jimmy Dean is in the book in detail, and Marlon Brando and Anthony Perkins. Um, and the end, how she felt at the end as an old woman, how she felt alone and lost and impoverished. It's all in there.
It's very detailed stuff.
Yes.
I think because you were the one to actually stumble upon these pages and pages that really detailed who this woman was, a woman that seemed to kind of come and go as the wind went. That's how Hollywood
Hmm.
seems to work. My last
Hmm.
question for you this evening would be why write this book and why did you feel that you were the one to tell her story, at least in
Uh,
your own words?
I just came up with that yesterday. I was thinking if I hadn't written this book, Mila would just be a footnote in history because it was hard to find information from her about her. So, how would I feel if I was the only person who had this information and just sat on it and didn't tell the world? I would be devastated. I had to do this because I love my Aunt Mila, and she deserves to have more than a footnote in history. She deserves to have a sense of immortality, and that's why I wrote the book.
As a true vampire would. And I appreciate those words so much. And I appreciate you again for sitting down and speaking with me about this. And I look forward to this book and getting my hands on it myself. I'm sure so much of my audience does as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so
Uh
much, Sandra. Have a good
huh.
evening.
You too. Good night.